All right, good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me or those who care to hear who I am Steve Carpenter, the Michael J. and Aimee Rusinko Kakos Dean in the College of Arts and Architecture at the Pennsylvania State University. We are here for another book talk. Today, we have another scholar from art history. We love our scholars from art history. Dr. Amara Solari is here. We're here to discuss a book entitled Maya, Christian Murals of Early Modern Yucatán. This is a co-authored book.
It is.
Co-authored book. Should we start with the co-authored part?
Sure.
So can you tell us a little bit about your co-author, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about you as the author.
Sure. My co-author, hi everybody. First of all, hello. Thank you
Amara.
for being here. I know it's a busy time of the semester, so I appreciate seeing all of your faces. My co-author is Linda K. Williams. She recently retired as a professor. She's a professor at Puget Sound in Washington. And she is a scholar of early modern Italy. And her husband worked a little bit in Yucatan. And so she would be there kind of on vacation and things and shifted her interest to the Yucatan Peninsula. And she and I became friends, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe. And when we kind of started organizing panels together, and I don't know, this kind of project organically evolved from out of a friendship. And we thought it'd be really fun to hang out in Yucatan together for extended periods of time, which is what we did.
Very
So
nice.
that's what happened.
So the partnership started early on, but not necessarily focused on this work. It evolved over time. Was there a moment where you can look back and say, okay, that was the hinge, that was the moment where we knew we were onto a project that we wanted to pursue that might ultimately become a book?
Yes, we organized, I'm trying to think of years now. My daughter was very young, so it's a little bit of a blur. I think around 2016, 2017, we organized a panel for the CAA. And we originally got the totally insane idea of making that panel be an edited volume, which I can't do, because those of you who've organized edited volumes, more power to you. I cannot do that. It's like herding cats, all the authors and oh my goodness. And so we thought it was going to be an edited volume, and then we realized we can't survive that. And so we decided that 2 people was enough, and we would co-author it ourselves.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So when I co-author something, I have this saying that I share with my co-authors, and I've worked with 3 or 4 over the years. The words belong to neither of us, and the words belong to both of us. So we don't have to ask permission to erase or modify. The other person can come back and erase, re-erase or unerase, and remodify and unmodify. What's your approach in co-authoring?
This one was, if Linda was here, I would say this too, and she would agree. I have co-authored many books, mostly with my husband, but with other colleagues as well. This was the most difficult for me.
Oh.
Because we have dramatically different writing styles. And those of you who know me in the audience will know that I'm really stubborn. And when I think I'm right with an idea, I am right with that idea.
Okay.
And Linda is so diplomatic. She was the perfect department head before she retired. And so this book is about a colonized space and time, and I'm extremely political. And so when I would choose words like violence, I meant that this was a violent act.
It was the right word.
For me.
Yeah.
Not for Linda.
Okay.
She would temper that a little bit. And so when we began the project, we thought we were going to co-author every single chapter together. But by the end, we realized that it was better if we would single author most of them, so that we wouldn't run into these kinds of issues. It also preserved our friendship, I think, as well.
And it resulted in a published book.
And it resulted in a published book, yes. So it was, and I'm very, as a writer, I write in a way that I think is unusual in that I write from the beginning of a book or the beginning of an essay straight through, which I think is like kind of insane, and most people don't do that. Linda doesn't do that. She has a kind of scattershot approach, which is what I've seen with my graduate students. They'll start with chapter 4, and then there's conventional wisdom. You should write the introduction at the end of a project, which I don't know how anybody does that. So that was an issue as well, because I want a perfect first sentence, followed by the second sentence, third sentence, and I want it to flow all the way through.
This is not probably the best metaphor, and you both talk about metaphor in the book as a device. We can talk about that in a bit, but you're almost describing the scholarly odd couple,
I think a little bit,
right?
yeah.
A Felix Oscar kind of thing going on.
But I think that's why this book was possible because of that. She kind of brings me down to earth, and I try to like rev her up a little bit, and so we kind of meet in the middle.
Nice.
So I think that's why it worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
And there are 8 chapters?
8 chapters.
8 chapters.
Yep.
I like how it's an even number. Was it?
And I don't even remember, we had to apply for a lot of grant money to make this project happen. And so when you apply for large grants, you have to, of course, do a bit of performance art and imagine a book that hasn't been written yet and the chapter organization. And this book looks nothing like that chapter organization that we originally intended either. So there was a lot of moving parts, I think, that kind of were adapted along the way.
That's good. You all could work it out and work it out with the funders and all of that. I really, co-authored books to me are interesting in that, for the reasons that you mentioned, you have to make sure your writing styles, if they don't match, they certainly respect each other, right? But also, many of them want to come across as one voice, and you preserve voices, although you also use the we.
We use the we a lot. We did go through right before the first submission and try to make it sound a little bit more uniform. But I read through it for the first time this weekend. After I publish books, I never look at them.
It's on the shelf. It's done.
I can't do anything about it. What if there's a mistake? I don't want to know. And I thought it read pretty fluidly throughout, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised to find that, because I wasn't quite sure with the vantage point. This came out in 2024. We turned it in 2022. It's been a hot minute, so I wasn't quite sure how it would read.
Sure.
But it felt good.
Felt good?
Yeah.
Read well?
I thought so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Worth interviewing an author or two here?
I hope so.
Okay. That sounds good. Can we shift to a couple of words, a couple of terms? One is Yucatán. Where is Yucatán?
Good question. Yucatán is this peninsula that jets out of the southern region of Mexico, jets northward into the Caribbean Ocean.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the name of a state, but it's also the Mexican part of Yucatán is the Yucatán Peninsula, but then it's composed of 3 states. And the southern part of the peninsula also encompasses the part of the country of Belize and a little bit of Guatemala as well.
And you spent time where in Yucatán doing this, writing this book?
Northern Yucatán, because that was the area that had been colonized by the Spaniards in the 16th century. The southern parts of Yucatán weren't really, even today, are pretty remote and weren't really colonized or settled, some parts until the 18th and 19th centuries.
There's a lot of layers, a lot of things going on here.
Lots of things going, a lot of players, a lot of,
Yeah. So the simple question, where is Yucatan?
It's like, what is Yucatán? Yeah, it's a.
And when is Yucatan?
When is Yucatán?
Right, all of that.
All of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions get harder.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Maya.
Oof, that's even harder. You're right.
I
Okay.
told you.
So Maya
I told you the questions get harder.
is a term we use, a modern term we use, that was, it's a term of ethnogenesis. So people in the 16th and 17th century wouldn't have conceived of themselves as a single ethnic entity. But starting in the late 19th century, early 20th century, we start to call all the people who speak versions of the Mayan language, there's 32 dialects still spoken, generally the Maya. there are kind of a suite of characteristics that unite all of these people, but they're very, very different. So the Maya, as we describe them today, live from the northern part of Yucatan all the way down the peninsula and into Guatemala, the highlands, into the northern parts of Honduras, northern parts of El Salvador, and all of Belize. And there's millions and millions of Maya who are still alive and speaking all these dialects.
All right, I don't know if this is a harder question or an easier question. Mural.
Mural. Yeah, harder.
See, the progression of question
Mural. We
difficulty.
wrestled with this one. This was a debated term actually with Linda and myself. So we were wall painting versus mural was something we wondered about. For art historians, mural is a generic term. The Europeanists would think of fresco and wet plaster. The Maya are using a combination of wet fresco techniques and dry fresco techniques, sometimes on the same painting. So some colors are applied to the wet plaster, and then they wait for the plaster to dry, and they'll go over it again in when it's dry with a different pigment. Muralism, as a practice, has a deep, deep history in the Maya world. So when the Spaniards arrived in the 16th century and asked Maya artists to paint the walls of churches, this was old hat. And so they relied on ancestral knowledge that went back millennia to paint these images.
Got it. Okay. So we have place, location, languages, traditions, all kind of moving and
Swirling.
doing their thing.
Yep.
All right. You have this?
Yes, like sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes it overwhelms me even still.
Okay. Then we have this colonizing imposition that
Yep.
includes other language and includes religious belief structures.
Yep.
So we have this and this. So tell me about the confluence of this and this.
Okay, so
And you can put this in your next slideshow.
I'll just video your hands, and then we'll have it as a clip. So, how far back do I need to go? So the Spaniards, I don't want to go back to central Mexico, but
Okay.
1519, Hernando Cortez comes through central Mexico, Aztecs, all of that, yada, yada, yada. Horrible, wars go on for years, dying, blah, blah, blah. Spaniards are coming down from central Mexico into what's now Guatemala and into Yucatan. It's a really protracted conquest. It takes decades, in some cases, like I said earlier, centuries for this area to be formally conquered. The northern part of Yucatan, the first real Spanish settlement, is established in 1541. Okay. That's on the coast. A little bit later in that same year, they make inroads and establish what will be the capital of the province. It's called Mérida. Some of you have been there on vacation, probably, to Mérida in Yucatan. And as part of that colonizing effort, there is an attempt to what we today would call Hispanicize the large indigenous population, not just in Yucatan, but in all of the viceregal Americas. In Yucatan, this process is overseen by the Franciscan order and the Franciscan order alone. So guys in robes, knotted belts, tonsured heads. Okay. They set up what are called, they're translated from Spanish, Indian villages. And these are villages that are apart from the Spanish towns, and they force indigenous peoples to live in these villages, and they essentially create churches, and they build Spanish-style towns from the ground up. Sometimes they're on the ruins of Maya towns that are either had been abandoned or in some cases were still lived in. Then they go about, and this is not a kind of sequential, things are happening all at the same time.
Yeah, I was doing this.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
And it's always like you want to kind of have a video of those negotiations at the very beginning, because it's a really powerful Maya elite families in some cases that are allowing these Franciscans to come in and build a church. Like how does that happen, Then they set about the task of converting thousands of indigenous people to Catholicism, sometimes with just one or two friars in each church. And so to do this, at the beginning, they educate the elite sons of the Maya ruling nobility in the monasteries, in the convents that, I'm using monastery, it's not quite like a European monastery, it's one of the churches that they build. And they become these kind of interstitial players where they are indigenous people, but they essentially function like Franciscan novitiates. They're like kind of pre-priests, if you will. And they are these indigenous people are really responsible for the evangelization in the province.
Got it.
So it's really complicated, but because we have indigenous people really leading the charge, the Catholicism that takes root is very Maya, it's very indigenous. The Pope would not have been happy with what was going on. And even today, when you visit Maya villages, the kind of public Catholic processions that happen, they don't look like traditional Roman Catholicism, and it's because they are indigenous.
Got it. I feel like all of this we had to
It's
kind of establish, because then we have these 8 chapters, and if I'm not mistaken, each chapter looks at a different convento. Is that how you say it?
Convento, great,
Convento.
yes. So that's the word in Spanish. It translates to convent, obviously, in English, but it's not a like cloistered space for women. It's more like a monastic complex, but in Yucatán, the conventos are semi-public spaces, right? They're kind of like community centers, even today.
And we find these murals in the conventos.
Yep.
Okay. So now we have all this and this,
Yep.
and we got to the murals in there
finally
somewhere.
got the murals. Yeah.
And the murals then help us look outwardly at the Christianity and the indigenous ways of being, but also we can look inwardly at them and understand or gain some sort of access to the religious, spiritual conventions.
I think so, yeah. So that was good. That was a good synopsis.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
See?
So the murals they're multivalent. So they are intentionally designed to be read and understood by many colonial types of peoples who are enacting in the space. But they are all produced by Maya artists. We don't have a single record or account of a Spanish artist or a Creole artist ever working in Yucatán until much later, until really the end of the 18th century. So in these Indian villages, we have Maya artists and Maya artists only. So they are not necessarily controlling the subject matter or the iconography of each mural, but they are certainly weighing in on composition, on materiality, on heavy artistic choices that inflect these works with valences that maybe only Maya audiences really understood.
Got it. So it seems to me many people would have been writing about and researching these murals and these conventos. Like, I mean, come on,
One
there's
would
all this
think.
stuff going on. Like, who doesn't want to go and
It's
investigate
so cool.
all of this,
I
right?
know.
And apparently not.
Not at all.
Who are 2 people we can think of who took up the
Just these two.
challenge? Just these 2.
Just these two. Yeah, it's a hard place to do work. You have to really, really love the region. I mean, we all love where we work, but it's hot. You're crawling in gross spaces. It's not easy field work. You need a lot of money to do it, so you have to get a lot of external funding. Takes a lot of time. It's a I won't say it's a more difficult art history, but it's, hey, put it this way. I've worked in Yucatan for 20 years. The book I'm writing right now is based in Santa Fe
Okay.
because I needed a little break.
Understood.
I needed just a little breather here.
Got it.
Yeah.
But seriously, this is a big contribution to the field. What you've put together in this book.
I think so. I mean, it's, I'm working in a periphery on a periphery, and those places are not usually centralized, kind of, or centered, I should say, in historiography. But for the people who still worship in these places. I kind of see more as a gift to contemporary Yucatecans and Mexicans and people who are, for whom these spaces are really the heart of their communities.
Got it.
Right now.
So we did this, did this. I heard you say something about crawling in yucky spaces.
Yeah, crawling in yucky spaces.
I heard you
The
talk about.
spiders.
You've also mentioned, these different writing styles of two scholars. Give me some good parts of writing this book.
Good parts.
Yeah.
It was so fun, even though the field work is so fun. So before we could even get to the writing, we had to figure out the corpus that we were studying, because since no one had really studied this before as a singular corpus, we literally spent, 2018 and 2019, I think, those research years, driving village to village to village to village to village to village, and figuring out if murals were extant or not. We had some clues on some of the larger churches, but the really remote places we just didn't know. And that was just, fun is the only way. So we'd arrive into Maya Village. Most of the small churches don't have resident friars that live there. Somebody will come in once a week to recite Mass, even still today. So we'd have to go door to door to all little Maya chozas, the thatched houses, and find the sacristan and get the sacristan to get us in the door to the church so we could get in there. Sometimes scary. Yeah.
Okay.
And typically, there would be children running around everywhere. And you always ask the Maya children, where are the paintings? Standard question. And those kids will take you right to them. So many beautiful memories of just exploring these 16th century structures by ourselves with little flashlights or our iPhone with these kids who were just, I think there's a green over there, and they would take you to what they saw as the green, and lo and behold, it's this iconographic moment that nobody studied. So that was really enjoyable, just as kind of like a, not scholarly in any way, but the fun part of doing field work that we all love. And then it was the collaboration, not just with Linda, but with everybody else who had to help to put this book together. So the scientists, the conservation people, the photographers I had to work with. It was, it was years in the making, just because the labor involved in collaboration is so great. One field season, 2019, we were flying drones in churches up to the altar, into murals that were behind the altar pieces, hoping to God we didn't crash the drone into.
That would be bad.
It would be really bad. One to find the drones in above one church and get it tangled with all the kids' kites that they were flying.
What?
Because the Maya kids, they play in the atrium of the churches still, and it's a shrub jungle, right, in Yucatan, and so the only place they can find cleared to fly kites
is inside to protect it.
is inside the walls of the church. And it's like open courtyard, basically. And so we were trying to do drone photography, and the damn kites kept coming over. So things like that, it's fun stuff.
Well, it's interesting because my next question was going to be about methodology. And so if you think about methodological approaches, well, my drone pilot license,
Yeah, methodology. This shifted because of the pandemic, I will say. So we were awarded our large NEH grant in October of 2019. And in that grant, we had applied for a lot of money to do sustained archival work, primarily in Spain, because that's where the imperial archives are. Spain, and I think we're going to go to the Vatican, and then spend some more time in central Mexico. We had spent one field research trip in the summer, before that grant came through, in the summer of 2019, taking microscopic samples of paint from the paint of, that trip, maybe 7 or 8 different churches, and then had a subsequent trip in March of 2020 where we collected maybe half a dozen more. And then, of course, the world shut down. We couldn't do any of our archival work that we had anticipated. And so the book really pivoted from being one that was going to be archivally heavy to one that was materially heavy, because that's all we had to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very different book in that way as well, methodologically. So
Right.
we worked with the Materials Characterization Lab here at Penn State,
Yes.
so chemists, physicists, and mineralogists, to do 4 different techniques of analysis to figure out the material components of the entire palette used by colonial period artists, which had never been done.
Wow.
We have that information for the pre-contact period,
Mm-hmm.
much earlier from the classic period, but never for the colonial period. So that was a shift, and it made me think a whole lot more, strangely, about objects.
Because you were focused more on the materiality
Yeah.
rather than the imagery and the iconography.
Or the archive. I'm like an archive brat. I love sitting in
Ah.
archives, and so much of my, I wrote 2 monographs on the Yucatan Peninsula before this book, and those are really textually heavy books. Those rely on translations of Mayan documents and different kinds of archival sources. And that's always been my kind of standard methodology. And then because of the pandemic, I didn't have access to those sources anymore. I'm like, oh God, I have to write this book. We have a contract.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise, what are we going to do? But we had all these samples we happened to have gotten out of the country
Right.
before everything shut down. So it forced me, and as an art historian, you think, of course, you think about the object. I don't know that I ever really did until this book, which is kind of embarrassing to admit. But I thought about how objects kind of circulated and how they were interpreted, but never about like the making of an object itself. It never really crossed my mind,
Mm-hmm.
because I was trained as an anthropologist before an art historian too.
Okay.
So I kind of think more philosophically, I guess, about how people relate to objects. And this completely shifted my thinking. And I think became a richer and more important book because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly, in Mexico, was more important because all of that materials work we did is the first step towards conservation programs of these murals.
Wow.
And they didn't have the resources to do the first step of materials work
Mm-hmm.
so that they could afford the next step of conservation work.
So you made that contribution to the field
Yeah.
and to knowledge construction in that way.
Yeah, and
Nice.
cultural preservation,
Mm-hmm.
right, which for me is kind of the most important. That's why I do what I do. For me, I'm
Mhm.
working with indigenous peoples, so
Mhm.
figuring out how to keep heritage alive and
Yeah.
vibrant in communities is an important part of
It's
my job.
important work. Good.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 more questions that I've sort of prepared for this conversational bit. And then I have 5 questions that are kind of quick response questions.
quick fires. Okay.
Quick fires. And then we're going to open the conversation to our studio audience,
Okay.
our gallery audience. They've been waiting patiently to jump in and ask even more difficult questions than I've conjured.
No.
So, really exciting. And you've kind of alluded to there's something next that you're working on. What's the next thing you're working on? And how did this project,
Mm-hmm.
how do I want to ask this? I'm assuming it did, this project inform the next one?
So that material angle, I think, is how it informed it. So the next project, like I said, I'm taking a little break from Yucatan. I'll go back there, but I just want a 5-year hiatus, maybe, something like this. So I'm working on 2 books right now that are based in New Mexico, so the province Nuevo Mexico, which, like Yucatan, was a provincial province, all evangelism overseen by Franciscans. I'm working on one book that examines the mural painting traditions, very similar, of the first couple generations of Franciscan friars who were in that area. So that's 1600 to 1680. Unlike this book, all the churches that I'm looking at for this next project are destroyed.
Oh,
So I'm making it even harder on myself.
what?
So they were either intentionally burned in the Pueblo Revolt, or they were abandoned prior to 1680 and are just ruins today.
Huh.
So I'm relying on 19th century and early 20th century excavation records and samples pulled from those excavations to reconstruct mural practices.
It kind of circles back to the archival
Yes,
interest.
but easy archival. It's so easy because it's mostly in English and it's 19th or 20th century, so it feels like I'm cheating.
I feel like you're cheating.
And it's largely in Washington, D.C. So again, very easy.
Easy, sometimes easy is the way to go.
I am reaching that age,
Right?
yes.
All right, here's the last question of these larger, complex questions. Built on an assumption, allegedly an art historian.
Allegedly.
I like that word, so
Yeah,
it's not always accurate, but I like
This is
using
very
it.
accurate,
Okay.
allegedly, yes.
What did you learn about the discipline of art history doing this project? Or what have you come to think differently about the discipline of
we-
art history as
As,
a
a-
result of this?
as art historians, and I think historians and humanists in general, we're trained to work like hermits, you know, by ourselves, desk, computer, reading. And I've learned that I think art history is better when we do it as a team. I think my next projects have teams of sometimes 10 people, or a team.
10.
Yeah, from all different disciplines and fields and expertise. And I think my work is more informed because I'm forced to get uncomfortable with what I think I know, because I'm working with really smart people who know way more than I do about certain things.
And their knowledge is necessary to inform
Yeah.
where
And
you're
so
headed.
particularly when you're working on these kinds of materials. And you know, now that I'm working in New Mexico, there's not just a need, but a desire to work with indigenous communities there. So learning so much with the kind of community-facing art history. So yeah, I think like the team aspect of what art history can look like, that's my takeaway.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to ask one more question.
It's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
I always feel like whenever I finish a project, like, okay, it's done, there's a question or two that's unanswered, like I thought I was going to get to and I didn't, or you know, maybe after you let some time go by and you read the book.
Yeah.
Is there an unanswered question that you didn't answer or you didn't get to, or that revealed itself? Like, why didn't we get to that as we were writing the book?
Well, a couple things have revealed themselves to me just fortuitously. Like I found when I was at the National Gallery last year, I found one of the print prototypes for one of the murals. So this happens when you write books. This is why I don't read them afterwards. Like you find that you put something in print, and oh God. So there are unanswered questions in that things I thought were unanswerable, I'm learning are not quite so unanswerable. And I also, this book is really just a first step, because with each passing year, more of these early modern murals are being revealed because whitewash is falling off the walls. And so I think there's a way in which it's a corpus that's expanding at the same time as it's being deteriorated from the environment. And so I think maybe some of the conclusions we reached as more are revealed probably aren't going to hold up, which is great. It's kind of a dynamic aspect to this particular subfield of art history that may, I guess, exists in every subfield, but when your corpus is constantly changing, you know, it's a different, I don't know, kind of approach to what is fact, you know, at that particular moment.
Got it, thanks. All right, no more, and one more question. So I'm going to
Okay.
go now to the 5.
Uh-oh.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Buckle up.
Okay.
What is your favorite word?
I don't know. This one.
I think you laugh every time I ask that question.
Jamie laughs every time. I love the word nuance. First of all, English is so ugly, right? English is kind of an ugly language, so nuance is a beautiful term. But also for those of us who deal with moments of this that you were describing,
Yeah.
nuance is so integral to revealing kind of that beautiful complexity of human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the concept and the sound of nuance.
Nuance.
Mhm.
Yes. Have to go to the other side
Like,
of the
yeah.
spectrum. What is your least favorite word?
I have so many.
I have so many least
I
favorite
have
words.
so many least
And
favorite
what,
words.
and what do you do as a profession? You use words all the time.
Yeah, thesaurus, I don't know. Right now, I hate the term unprecedented. I'm tired of seeing it in headlines. And if you ever use the word unprecedented, you have a very short view of history, because almost everything is precedented.
You cross out my next.
I know. Unprecedented. I also hate the word no,
You hate the word no.
because I hate to be told no. I
Okay.
hate it. Yeah, I just, since I was a small, my parents are like, oh God, our redheaded middle child. Jeez Louise, yeah, no. Don't like it. Necessary, I realize, now that I am a parent, but.
I'm just imagining some conversation. Is this unprecedented? No!
No!
There's full
It's
conversation.
nuance.
It's nuance. What is your favorite comfort food?
Ooh. Looking at my husband. Udon? Yeah, I love
Udon.
all Asian noodles of every variety.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your favorite toy or game?
Oh God. So I love video games of all kinds. I could have written like 20 more books in my career if I wasn't addicted to video games.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Mm-hmm. Both Zeldas probably are my favorite.
Both
games.
Zeldas.
Both of them. Love
Okay.
them with my whole heart. Yep.
This is great. Now, I'm getting to the fifth question is coming up.
Okay.
I'm trying not to make the connection between what you just said and this next question,
Uh-oh.
but maybe I've already made the connection by saying I'm trying not to make the
Oh
connection.
yeah, maybe it's there already.
If you were not an art historian, what profession would you pursue? I'd write about video games.
I would designing video games.
Would you really?
Oh yeah, it'd be so fun. Yes, but I also pastry chef. I love cooking.
Wait a minute.
I know.
My brain just went sideways.
Yeah,
You design video games, or
pastry
you would
chef.
be a pastry chef.
Kind of the same. It's very technical, you know, ones and zeros and artistry involved.
Okay.
Confections of different sorts.
Confection.
Of different
There it
sorts. I
is.
think so,
That's
yeah,
the
it
link.
comes down to the writing style. First sentence, second sentence.
That's the link. I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those are my
There's
two kind of.
precision and all
yeah.
sorts of.
I would also have loved to have been a surgeon, I think.
Now you're back to this.
No, surgery is also very.
No, what I'm saying is you have pastry chef
Yeah.
and video games and surgery,
I
they're
like
all-
making things, but I like precision.
but you like precision.
Mhm.
I get it.
Yeah.
And there's a sequence,
There's a rule of operations.
rule of
Yes.
operations.
How I became a humanist, I don't know. It's a very strange thing.
Well, we're glad you did, because if you didn't, we wouldn't have this book.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to open it up to the audience. Question? Yes,
I
go ahead.
start, yeah, because before I need to leap out and put money in the
In the meter, yeah.
Yeah, and that brings me to sort of my question: what was the nuance of the meter? If you go back to that reflection point of the how and who created the start of painting. So, what was the financial? Who put money into whose meter and how to get the artists on board? Was it
It's such a good
Shane, if
question.
something happened to you, a goat herd, or here's some extra this or that? What motivated
At the
them?
very beginning, I think that that most of these artists were providing labor as a form of tribute payment.
Right.
Technically, tribute payment to the Franciscans or Encomenderos, the Spaniards who were resident,
So
but being mediated through ancestral rulers of their town.
Right.
Because the artists who created these murals, they're descended from the artists who were creating the murals on the sides of pyramids or inside temples, which also would have been a form of tribute payment.
So there was no financial transaction in
Kind of
Wow.
financial, but not, they weren't being paid a
yeah.
salary.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I have to read the book. I'm sure you refer to it.
I don't actually, because we don't really know.
Okay.
And like I said earlier, those moments of first contact and of kind of like the earliest negotiations that were going on, that's the million-dollar question for vice-regal art history. And
Yeah.
we don't have any evidence of really what those looked like.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
re-
where surgery comes in.
There's the
Yeah,
surgery.
there's the
Stitch it
surgery
all
part.
together.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I'll be
Great. Thanks.
Thank
Okay, I saw a question here, and then over here, and then we'll go to this side of the audience. Yeah.
Hi, Nancy.
So you mentioned interacting with the children who would often lead you to the murals.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have interactions doing this fieldwork with contemporary worshipers? You mentioned these are churches that still have, really,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everybody in these towns, this is where they go to church, where their kids are baptized, where they get married. So all of them are still using this church. There is, Latter-day Saints there's different Christian sects in the area nowadays, but largely Maya people living in villages in Yucatan still self-identify as Catholic. So.
So did you ever, talk about your work with any of them?
Oh no, we got approval from every Maya village council to do this work as part of kind of our own negotiations, because we never had an instance where, did we ever? A village didn't want us to do the work there. And so with every church, we basically had to triangulate between the Catholic Church, with capital C, the local Maya community, and the Mexican government's a governmental agency in English called the National Institute for Anthropology and History, which is like the cultural ministry, I guess, in Mexico. And so those three stakeholders always had to be in agreement. So actually the first thing that started off this project was a 3-hour-long lunch with the Archbishop of Yucatan to kind of get his blessing that we could go into all of these churches, because the churches are technically owned by the Catholic Church still, stewarded by the Mexican government, but really taken care of on a physical level by the Maya community in which they reside.
Interesting.
So it was just a lot of talking, so many conversations with so many different people, just because I don't want to ever work in a place where I'm not wanted or I'm stepping on toes or.
Great. Thanks. Question.
So when you go into a project like this, where you've got building a corpus, you're probably finding a lot of patterns, and some of those patterns are probably patterns that you expected to find, and then your research confirms that indeed the thing that you thought would be was.
Yep.
What are some of the patterns that popped up that you didn't expect at all?
Way more Mary than I thought was going to be there. She's everywhere. And Jesus is very, very infrequent. I only have 4 images of him in the entire Jesus, I know. That was one of them. I thought there would be a more expansive use of Central Mexican pigments. I didn't find a single one. So that trade network had completely disrupted within the first 2 generations of conquest. So those are the 2 big ones of what I didn't expect to find. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Over on this side, question. Bill.
Amara and I were the non-Western, or we were, for quite a while, and never really overlapped except when I went to Ecuador to work on some of that stuff. So a comparison that you've probably done at CAA or whatever, in Ecuador there was a tradition of painting, but not murals. Well, there was murals, but painting especially for gifts to Spain. So one of the most famous ones is Sanchez Galque, who did this portrait, supposedly the earliest portrait that we know of from that was present to King Philip from 1599, and it was a portrait of, they call it mulattoes of Esmeraldas.
Esmeraldas, yeah.
It's been a long time since I've been there, but I actually have been there. So he painted to prove to the Spaniards that these, quote, mulattoes had been conquered and were, subservient to Spain and so on. But there's lots of nuances in there, and my postdoc colleague Tom Cummins has written a lot about those. So the question is, he who did the painting was an indigenous painter and did a different kind of painting. Has anybody looked at these early indigenous painters in the colonies, around there, and is there any commonality of what they were doing and so on? So
Not in Yucatan.
okay.
So we don't have, I'm trying to think of a single
I mean,
instance.
it's a different kind. It's
It's
painting rather than mural.
Sure, but we don't even have strong evidence of extant pieces that are either surviving or even mentioned archivally of panel paintings or anything like this painted by indigenous artists. Because in that case, that was very much targeted as a royal commission, right, to be sent, as you said. But the art that's being created in these pueblos is for local consumption. So that it's a very different situation. In central Mexico, yes, we have in kind of the more cosmopolitan centers, Peru, Quito, we'd find what you're talking about, but I don't think in Yucatan that was kind of an interest until later, right? And then it becomes, actually not really. Nothing is coming to mind for Yucatan.
But they were both painters, obviously.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. All right, I see a hand over here, and then we'll come back over here.
Is there a mural that you were particularly drawn to, and if so, how would you describe it?
That's a good question. There's one sacristy that I particularly love, a little tiny church called Temash. And it is a sacristy I had been to many, many times. But it wasn't until we did gigapixel photography in it that we actually saw the complexity of the murals that are still extant on all four walls of the sacristy. And it represents what I think was present in many, many other churches. And it's a little time capsule mural because we think it was painted around 1577, 1580, somewhere in there, and hasn't been touched. And so it is just this gorgeous room where you have the Annunciation on the east wall, crucifixion on the west wall, and then on the north and south walls you have these procession of Franciscan male saints on the north and virgin martyrs on the south. And it's just so lovely. And it's beautiful in a way that, I mean, all of these things are beautiful, but it's a poignant piece, and it locates these events in the landscape of Yucatan because Maya artists rendered local tree species that were meaningful to them religiously, theologically, even medicinally. And so for me, that's kind of my most cherished cycle that I worked on. Yeah.
Question.
So, Amara, I have a question. It was prompted by your discussion of the kind of princes or aristocrats being brought in by the
Yeah.
Franciscans. And I was reading, Camilla Townsend wrote this little thing for Timson Hudson on Aztec myths or something that I
Yep.
read on the plane down, this past weekend.
Yep.
And she describes the same phenomenon
Yep.
in central Mexico.
Yep.
And so I was thinking, related to kind of regional difference versus kind of maybe something that's shared across regions. How do you think your work relates to what happens in central Mexico artistically? Is that where something branches off differently, or do you find kind of similar types of artistic, just as you find a similar kind of approach to evangelization in those contexts?
This is a really good question. It's something that people ask me at conferences a lot. because most of the people in vice-regal art history work in central Mexico, right? So they're always wondering, like, how do I incorporate this into my own research? I think what was going on in Yucatan is its own thing, and just like I think what's going on in Santa Fe is its own thing. In those two evangelical theaters, you have a single mendicant order who are answering to no one. They are not competing with the Augustinians, the Dominicans, Jesuits later. They are on their own, and they are able, in that kind of a context, to just completely treat artistic production in a way that we would assume they wouldn't, and that is for an evangelical purpose. And so I think they're giving indigenous artists more leeway than they would ever do in a place like central Mexico. The populations are very different too, right? Where in central Mexico you have tens of thousands of indigenous parishioners. In Yucatan, the largest village is maybe 3,000 people, 4,000 people. So I just think there's kind of like a cosmopolitan center versus a real periphery, and a level of isolation as well. These Franciscans, they literally get away with murder in both Santa Fe and in Yucatan. They get away with things that they would not get away with if they were in Cusco or Lima or Mexico City. It's like kind of cowboy country in many ways, yeah.
I mean, I also think color is very different.
The color's very different, yeah. And that was one, actually, to Jamie's question, what was I surprised by? So there's always been this dominant assumption in vice-regal art history that in terms of wall painting, grisaille comes first, because the assumption being that indigenous artists are copying prints, which I think is a silly assumption, but it's dominated the literature for generations now. And the oldest church we have at Mani, the images you see on the wall today are grisaille. And so in 2 books, I wrote about how the Yucatecan art historical trajectory for muralism basically follows that of central Mexico. But then lo and behold, we have these fancy cameras, and I realized, no, the first and earliest images at this early church are very polychromatic. So that was a shock also. So that kind of turned the historiography on its head and made me question what's going on in central Mexico as well. Because both the Franciscans, actually all the mendicant orders, and the indigenous populations of the Americas, polychromatic imagery was their go-to, not grisaille. Like, grisaille was used, of course, in very kind of programmatic ways, but grisaille would have been a very bizarre choice for a Franciscan coming from Spain in the 16th century. So yeah, we really only have one full grisaille mural cycle, and then pictorial moments of it being used in very circumscribed situations, like around a door frame, for example, something like that.
It's mostly decorative.
It's kind of, there's a weird saint there, but yeah, basically decorative. That's it.
Great, thanks. Question 1, 2, 3. We'll just swing across this way. All right.
You mentioned that whitewash is coming up in other places. Can you talk about why some of these murals would have been whitewashed and when?
So there's a really dramatic aesthetic shift that happens in the 18th century where these start to look kind of like folk art, and the garishness of the color becomes not so desirable. And so towards the end of the 18th century, most of them are whitewashed over, which is what preserves them, which is great. So it's an aesthetic choice. Not all of them are whitewashed over. I think I haven't done a kind of data-driven analysis, but I think I would find that the churches closest to Mérida, so the provincial capital, are the ones that are whitewashed over most frequently. And as I get out into the provinces, we find, like, for example, one of our most audacious polychromatic images wasn't even painted until the middle of the 17th century. So right around the same time, we're closer to the center, they're being whitewashed, and you come up with this like outrageous cycle in this tiny little town of Tabi, which is literally in the middle of nowhere in the eastern part of the province.
But it's not like fear of syncretism
No. I've argued elsewhere that the use of grisaille that shows up is fear of idolatry. Syncretism, I'm not even really sure the Franciscans had that in their kind of mental wheelhouse to think of things that way. There was either idolatry or there wasn't, right? It was kind of a binary there. But yeah, it wasn't a preventative as far as I can assume. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Question?
I'm having a hard time always phrasing it. But if there was like a predominant kind of Mayan indigenous culture that's, I'm just wondering if there was an artist who was then asked to follow or illustrate something that he didn't understand because it wasn't his heart culture, whether there'd be, I guess I'd find it interesting to find a clash between the two, the request to illustrate and the reaction, which is still coming from a heart that doesn't quite understand the imposition. Like if that would be an interesting.
I don't think understanding was the issue. I think it was more about accepting. So there was Catholicism, as it was being taught to indigenous people, was not very complicated. And, you know, Maya religion is insanely complex. Like it is just 400 different deities, all of which have 4 different aspects. And I mean, it's crazy wild, right? But there certainly had to be these moments, right? And so I think what the materials analysis revealed in this book is that the Mayas were making very, very conscious decisions about what kinds of pigments they were using to portray very specific pictorial moments. And those pigments had resonances with pre-contact religious systems. They had valences, they had symbolisms. And so by using these particular pigments, they were able to imbue what we see as just purely Catholic imagery with a kind of indigenous meaning. So it was a mode of accommodation. It was a way to make Catholicism Maya. And people find this not just with, scholars find this not just with the material world, but with the textual world as well. So there's a handful of scholars now who are doing incredible work translating Mayan catechismic records and things and finding that the word choices people are using are doing the exact same kinds of accommodating moves.
Great, thanks. All right, one last question. This is going to be the best question of the evening,
Oh.
and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question kind of relates to your last comment, and I was wondering if the subject matter was localized. I was thinking in the Andes, a lot of murals sometimes feature the Last Supper and Jesus is dividing a guinea pig.
The guinea pig, yes.
So I was curious if there was something like that in the murals.
There's not, and that also was something that surprised me. So in central Mexico, in the Andes, we have iconographic moments that are so local, like place names or glyphs, something like that in central Mexico, or the guinea pig, of course. In the Andes, besides the tree species that I mentioned earlier, nothing obvious comes to mind. And so I think they were being a little bit more sneaky about it by choosing the materiality of these pigments. Yeah, there's directionality that happens too. So there's, in some cases, like in cloisters, where there's quadrilateral designs, they're placing images of Catholic icons in directions where the symbolism of the icon kind of overlaps with the pre-Columbian symbolism of that particular directionality and its role in like primordial cosmogonic narrative, for example. And so that's another kind of sneaky way, but nothing overt like what you're talking about. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that question. Maya Christian Murals of Early Modern Yucatan. Amara Solari, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.